not mature enough as a society, I think, to look in the mirror and see how we manufactured American poverty, how we manufactured housing that was meant to seclude these poor people, and how we turned a blind eye to creating a middle class while simultaneously excluding people from it.
Uncle Sam starts clearing Atlanta slums in the plan to give modern dwellings to the poor. Secretary of the Interior Ickes fires the first blast.
We think of public housing as a place where low-income, mostly minority families live. That's not how public housing began in this country. During the Depression, many families lost their homes. They couldn't afford to pay rent, and so there was an enormous housing crisis in the country. That was the reason that the Roosevelt administration began the first public housing for civilians in the nation's history.
Here, at the request of the citizens of Atlanta, we have cleaned out 9 square blocks of antiquated, squalid buildings. And in their place, we see the bright, cheerful buildings of the Peckwood Housing Project.
The Public Works Administration began to build public housing across the country, primarily for white middle-class families. It also built some housing for African Americans, but it was always segregated. Separate projects for whites, separate projects for African Americans, very often creating segregation in neighborhoods or communities that had not known segregation before.
The government had no interest in seeing this kind of housing go to the poorest of the poor. The poorest of the poor were the people they were trying to get out of the slums to make way for the upwardly mobile working class.
They want residents who fit a certain image. They present them as a middle-class population. You'll see a mother in the starched dress and the perfect white apron in her kitchen with her appliances. They're telling everyone these people are low income, but they're the deserving poor. And deserving poor means you fit into this middle class image of respectability.
Cities within cities, scientifically planned and built, where a man and his family with a small income can live with comfort and dignity.
The government thought about public housing as a step up for families. You're working hard, so you're able to save, and hopefully, you live in public housing 1 or 2 years, and you will then be able to move into your next step. The next step for whites was very clearly a house in the suburbs, which was supported through the federal government's insuring of home mortgages.
When the government's deciding which loans it's going to insure and which loans it doesn't, it explicitly looks at race. Neighborhoods that are white will get the highest rating and are most insurable. Integrated neighborhoods will be less desirable, and often the least desirable of all neighborhoods are going to be black neighborhoods. And so the government literally takes maps of every city and it outlines black neighborhoods in red. So from the 1930s until the 1960s, 98% of all federally subsidized loans go to white Americans. That means that white Americans are getting into houses, they're able to build wealth, and black Americans are largely shut out of that market or having to finance through other means.
The suburbs are wholly a creation, really, of the federal government. The government enables the movement out to the suburbs through the rise of new infrastructure. The interstate highway system, starting in 1956, is a huge boon that helps make suburban living possible. In many cities across the country, they put those highways there, in some cases to erase what were regarded as black slums, but always to try to keep white and black communities apart.
So white families who had been living in public housing, they now had the support of the federal government to buy a home. Whereas there was no next step for black public housing residents. There was no ladder.
So the public housing that originally had been intended primarily for white families became really the anchor of many urban neighborhoods that became all black.
Increasingly, across the country, the waiting lists for public housing turned towards more lower-income households. And so in Atlanta and in other cities, the housing authorities went with those who applied. So this was a major transformation to really see public housing become the battlefield hospitals, the place where you cope with the poorest of the poor and not reward the best off among the poor.
The cumulative effect of all this is that you wind up with two entirely different relationships to this country. One is the lineage of the New Deal through post-World War II, through the reforms in the economy and, suburbanization and housing that has created, this ideal, in America. And the other is a population that has, by and large, been denied access to those things.